History is as full of mistakes as it is of heroic tales. But some mistakes take not just a few lives, but thousands. One order, one wrong map, one misunderstanding, and 10,000 people dead. This is the story of a war that should never
Unravel the past. Discover the truth.
have happened, and how one mistake turned into one of history's most tragic massacres. September 1914. World War I had just begun. Europe had not yet fully grasped the true horror of the war. The French army was confident. "We'll be in Berlin in a few weeks," they said. Morale was high, plans were ambitious. But the reality was very different. The French Third Army Corps had established a defensive line in the Lorraine region to the north. Thousands of soldiers were waiting in the trenches, planning their next move. Commanders were studying their maps. They believed the German forces were retreating. Reconnaissance reports were coming in. Enemy positions are empty. The enemy positions were marked as empty on the maps. But those maps were 2 days old. And those 2 days would cost 10,000 lives. On the morning of September 21st, fog had settled. Lorraine's fields were covered in a thick white blanket. Visibility was almost zero. You couldn't see more than 10 meters ahead. French reconnaissance units reported early in the morning, "The Germans are retreating. The positions have been abandoned." The commanders did not hesitate. This was a great opportunity. Pursue them. Advance quickly. Finish them off with a surprise attack. 5 divisions moved out. Tens of thousands of soldiers received their orders. Heavily laden, they entered the morning fog with their rifles. Their eyes were determined, their steps hurried. "We must not let the enemy escape," they said. But there was no enemy behind the fog. There were their own troops there. A radio message would determine their fate. It was around 8:30. A French division reported its position. But the coordinates were wrong. Perhaps fatigue, perhaps panic, perhaps a simple misreading. The other division picked up those coordinates. They looked at the map, they marked it as an enemy position, and they ordered the artillery units, "Open fire." The first shell fell at 8:42, the second at 8:43. Within minutes, all hell broke loose. French soldiers in the trenches were being torn apart by their own artillery shells. The wounded were screaming, calling for help. The radios were jammed. Everyone was waiting for orders, but no one understood what was happening. The commanders still believed this was heavy losses inflicted on the enemy. The fog had obscured everything. The Germans were stunned. They hadn't attacked. They were sitting quietly in their own positions. But the French were destroying themselves. Artillery coordinates aimed at the wrong target were hitting their own infantry. Units trying to escape began retreating in panic. Other French lines saw this retreat. Enemy attack, they thought, and opened fire. Now everyone was firing at everyone else. A war had been accidentally started against themselves. By noon, more than 10,000 soldiers had died. Some were killed by friendly fire, others shot each other in panic. Some lost their way in the fog and drowned in the swamps. The rest fell silent, not understanding what had happened. The radio lines were down. No one could reach anyone. Even the birds had fallen silent. The war was not over, but there was no reason for this war. By evening the fog had lifted, the sky cleared, the sun illuminated the blood-red fields. The commanders finally saw the truth. Their own soldiers lay scattered across the land. There was no enemy. There never had been. Wrong orders, broken communications, outdated maps. All of these factors combined to create a single catastrophe. Reports described the incident as a minor tactical error. The true number was concealed. Official records referred to only casualties resulting from confusion. But everyone knew. That morning, not a single enemy bullet had been fired. And 10,000 young men had been killed by their own army. Years later, historians called this event the Lunéville massacre. But most of the documents were destroyed. Some of the witnesses were silenced. And official history books made no mention of this event, because no one wanted to admit that a nation had killed its own children in such a terrible mistake. Sometimes shame is truly more powerful, and the pages of history are turned silently. Today, rusted bullets can still be found on the ground in Lorraine's silent fields. Bent helmets, stories buried in the earth. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in, the villagers tell strange tales. They hear gunfire, orders echoing across the empty plain, shouts, and then silence. Perhaps the spirits of those soldiers are still trying to understand what happened, because that war should never have been fought. And those deaths were merely the result of a mistake. This was the story of the war that should never have been. 10,000 soldiers died by mistake.